Okay, I will admit it. I have done my best to avoid this subject. Not because I'm afraid of it, mind you. It's just that up until now, it hasn't really been interesting enough to get into. But there's no avoiding this anymore. We've got to talk about it. The heat's being turned up, the water's starting to boil, and things are definitely making a move. What am I referring to? Trump versus DeSantis. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to the electronic front porch and let's talk. Now, as I said, I have done my dead level best to avoid this subject. Again, not because I'm afraid of it, but because it's a long way between now and the beginning of 2024. We don't know who all the candidates are going to be, and we don't know how yet everything is going to quite shake out. But there are pundits in the world, and there are people like me, simple little social media content creators, and we've got to have something to talk about, especially when candidates this early start laying out policy positions. And that's exactly what's happened recently. Tucker Carlson of Fox News sent out a questionnaire to all of the declared Republican candidates for president and people that he thinks may have an interest in getting into the race. They may not wind up doing it in the long run, but their names are being floated. Now, the policy question that he's asking about has to do with the biggest foreign policy issue going on in the world right now, and particularly where it affects the United States, the war in Ukraine. Now, Trump, for his part, answered it, and he answered it in a manner that is traditional and consistent with really where he's been going all the way back to 2015. As far as he's concerned, where Ukraine is mentioned, it's a European issue. Let the Europeans pay for it. Our job in this should be to try to de escalate this thing. We should not be going for regime change in Russia. And we definitely ought to be trying to de escalate this issue before this turns into a nuclear war with Russia, which is altogether possible the way certain parties in this country keep egging on a conflict between our nation and Russia. Now, as I say, Trump's been very consistent in all this, and the answer that he gave to Tucker Carlson's questionnaire is typical Trump. As a matter of fact, as with the normal bravado you would expect from the Donald, he says he can negotiate a treaty within 24 hours between Ukraine and Russia. Okay, that's a little bit more bravado than I'm used to from Trump, but I see where he's going with this. The idea, let's try to make peace between these parties. This war is not doing them or us any good. Now, as I say, that's Trump. This is the kind of answer you expect from Trump. But it's not Trump's answer that's getting all the attention. It's what Ron DeSantis wrote in response that has all of official Washington going seven kinds of crazy. And we're going to take a look at that here in just a second. So, what is Ron DeSantis like on questions of foreign policy? Well, up till now, we really don't know, or didn't know, I should say, because most everything Ron DeSantis has focused on has been questions of domestic policy, particularly as it relates to the state of Florida. His battle with Disney, his taking on woke culture. He's been doing a lot of things that have made him the darling of conservative media and a lot of Republican voters in general. Now, as I say, most of that is on questions related to the state of Florida, but we do have some idea of what he might be like on foreign policy because remember, before he was a governor, he was a congressman. And that's where his record starts giving people pause. For example, when there were troubles down in Venezuela and certain neocons were seeing the opportunity to get the U.S. involved down there, he wanted us to be very interventionist in intervening in Venezuela. He criticized Trump on the question of Ukraine and wanted Trump to be even more interventionist than what he was at that point, which was very, very minimal. He definitely wanted to see the U.S. more strongly involved. That's DeSantis, I'm saying. And also on the question of the Iraq War, he wanted to see it go on and on until finally whatever resolution that meant, but we were going to stay doggone until the job was done. That doesn't sound very much like a populist, America First, MAGA kind of position on foreign policy. So for people who are looking for an alternative to Trump, that's giving them some pause. They like Trump's policies, they're just not wild about Trump or even the way he delivers his policy positions. They find him to be a bit too off-putting. Maybe DeSantis can be, Trump without Trump. But it's the foreign policy stuff, when you go back and look at his record, that makes everybody go, oh man, I don't know about this Ron DeSantis guy. But all of that seemed to change in how DeSantis answered Tucker Carlson's questionnaire. Now, I'm going to take you to an article by the legendary Byron York of the Washington Examiner, who we here on the front porch affectionately refer to as the Owl. So the Owl wrote an article in the Washington Examiner today discussing DeSantis' position that he put to Tucker Carlson. Now, I'm going to read a little bit of this, and then I'll interject as needed. What, you didn't expect that I wouldn't interject? What, haven't you been around this channel long enough? At any rate, here's how Tucker Carlson worded his questions about Ukraine. Number one, is opposing Ukraine and Russia's war in it a vital American national strategic interest? Number two, what specifically is our objective in Ukraine, and how will we know when we've achieved it? Number three, what is the limit of funding and materiel you would be willing to send to the government of Ukraine? Question number four, should the United States support regime change in Russia? Number five, given the Russian economy and currency are stronger now than before the war, do you believe that U.S. sanctions have been effective? And finally, do you believe the United States faces the risk of nuclear war with Russia? Now, prior to this answer in this question that we're going to see from Ron DeSantis, you could probably make an argument that Ron DeSantis is a typical establishment neocon sort of foreign policy guy among Republicans. But these answers start turning that on its head and make everybody in the establishment wonder, who are you and what'd you do with the real Ron DeSantis? For example, DeSantis says any of the following. And again, from Byron York's great article today in the Examiner, we read the following. Quote, while the U.S. has many vital national interests, securing our borders, addressing our readiness within our military, achieving energy security and independence, and checking the economic and cultural and military power of the Chinese Communist Party, becoming further entangled in a territorial dispute between Ukraine and Russia is not one of them. The Biden administration's virtual blank check of funding for this conflict for, quote, as long as it takes, without defined objectives or accountability, distracts us from our country's most pressing challenges. Whoa! What the? Huh? And that's exactly what everybody in establishment Washington, D.C. was going when they first read that. Oh, but it gets even better. Listen to this. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Moving on down. Without question, peace should be the objective. I know a bunch of war contractors aren't going to be happy about that. But anyway, the U.S. should not provide assistance that could require the deployment of American troops or enable Ukraine to engage in offensive operations beyond its borders. F-16s and long-range missiles should therefore be off the table, which is something that people in the United States government have been advocating for, or certain parties thereof. These moves would risk explicitly drawing the United States into the conflict and drawing us closer to a hot war between the world's two largest nuclear powers. That risk is unacceptable. And it gets even better. I'll keep reading. There's not much more to go, so hang with me, folks. A policy of regime change in Russia, no doubt popular among the D.C. foreign policy interventionalists, of which Ron used to be one, but I digress, would greatly increase the stakes in this conflict, making the use of nuclear weapons more likely. Such a policy would neither stop the death or destruction of the war, nor produce a pro-American Madisonian constitutionalist in the Kremlin. History indicates that Putin's successor, if in this hypothetical, would likely be more ruthless. The cost to achieve such a dubious outcome could become astronomical. The Biden administration's policies have driven Russia into a de facto alliance with China. Because China has not, will not abide by the embargo, Russia has increased its foreign revenues while China benefits from cheaper fuel. Coupled with this intentional depletion of the strategic petroleum reserve and support for the left's Green New Deal, Biden has further empowered Russia's energy-dominated economy and Putin's war machine at America's expense. And finally, our citizens are also entitled to know how billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars are being utilized in Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, that is, as far as the neocon establishment of the Washington Republican Party is concerned, that's tantamount to almost a declaration of internal war. And it's most certainly a 180 from what DeSantis has traditionally advocated for when he was a congressman. Now, how did official Washington take it? Not well. I'll read you some reactions from an article that came out today in the New York Times, that quaint little alternative newspaper. Some quotes from some typical Washington people. DeSantis is wrong and seems to have forgotten the lessons of Ronald Reagan, says former Representative Liz who? Oh, Cheney. Oh, yeah. I remember her. Didn't she serve in Congress? But I digress. This is not a territorial dispute. The Ukrainian people are fighting for their freedom. Surrendering to Putin and refusing to defend freedom makes America less safe. I really wish we had an honest debate about this. I do. Senator Lindsey Graham, who, from my perspective, has never seen a war he didn't want to get someone else's kids killed in, said the following. Could not disagree more with Mr. DeSantis' characterization of the stakes. Quote, the Neville Chamberlain approach to aggression never ends well. This is an attempt by Putin to rewrite the map of Europe by force of arms. Yeah, so as you can tell, people are just really happy with where old Ron went on this one. But is this going to work? And there are questions I've got about his policy position. So I think we need to have a good long chat about this. Now, I've got some questions about this, and I'm going to ask one straight out of the chute that's probably going to offend a lot of my friends who are Ron DeSantis supporters. Is this a genuinely held belief on the part of Ron DeSantis, or is this political expediency? Oh, front porch, I can't believe you'd ask that question. Look at everything Ron DeSantis has done in Florida. I'm not disputing any of that. But how do you square the answers that he gives to Tucker Carlson with 6 years of congressional record when he's acting like every other neocon establishment interventionist Republican that was in Congress at the time? Now, I'm not saying maybe his position is genuine, and if it is, I'll be the first one to come on here and say, I was wrong. But I'm sorry. Here's his record. Here's what he's saying now. Politicians are allowed to change their minds on things. I get that. But doing a complete 180 swing on something like this just before you decide to run for president? I got to ask the question, is he being legitimate about this? Plus, now here's my next question. So, where does this square him with the establishment never Trump crowd? I mean, is this the mulligan, the only mulligan that they will allow him? You know, that one golf shot that is so bad, you line it up, you hit it, and instead of going down the fairway, it goes straight into the water. Is this the mulligan that the establishment's going to give him? In other words, okay, Ron, as long as you're with us on everything else, that's fine. We'll allow you to be off the reservation on Ukraine. You know, that's the mulligan. Maybe. But you got to also keep in mind, too, DeSantis is walking a very fine line here between, you know, being or courting is probably the better way to say it, courting the establishment big donor class of the Republican Party and being a, you know, I'm Trump without being Trump, you know, populist. But if that's what he's trying to do, being Trump without being Trump, then that begs a very interesting question. And I'm not going to ask it. I'll let Bill Maher of Real Time do it, because I'll tell you what, he dropped what may be the best line I've heard in a long time. Listen to this. This is from his show over the weekend.
They make a real effort not to understand the Trump voter. And, you know, it's like, oh, DeSantis is going to be great because it's Trumpism without Trump. And I think they're like, why would we want a tribute band when the actual band is still playing?
You know, I may not agree with Bill Maher on a lot of things, but that's got to be one of the best lines I've heard in a long time. Why do you want a tribute band when you can actually go listen to the band? And that's the issue for DeSantis. Okay, you want to get the Trump voter. Well, the Trump voter's looking at you going, yeah, but there's Trump. I can still vote for him. And that's going to be the biggest problem. Or put it a little more philosophically, what's the justification for a Ron DeSantis candidacy? That's where if he's going to get into this thing, and if he's going to win the Republican primary, he's got to convince Republicans and especially Trump voters to vote for him over the man they would otherwise normally give their vote to. So, in the end, is this answer on the question about Ukraine going to be enough to get DeSantis over with Trump voters? Now, you'll notice something that I just said. I didn't say Republican voters, I said Trump voters. There is a vast difference between those two things. The coalition that supports Donald Trump is made up of any number of different groups, but it's made up of people who are high school educated, there's stronger Hispanic support, there's stronger African American support. These are people that up until 2016 hadn't been involved in the political process. Now, establishment Republican political operatives in D.C. have been working from a very false misunderstanding about the people who have voted for Donald Trump. You see, they're working from the assumption that if people voted for Trump, that means they're voting for Republicans. No, 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 no. They're voting for the man. They're not voting for the party. And the proof of that, if you need any, are the midterm elections of 2018 and 2022. Trump wasn't on the ballot. These people didn't come out to vote. There were down numbers in a lot of different places around the country, in spite of the fact that Donald Trump was trying to get the vote out on behalf of Republican candidates. And this is a longer term problem for Republicans, because what are you going to do one of these days when Trump's not on the ballot anymore? See, they're thinking, oh, okay, sooner or later we're going to get rid of him and everything's going to go back to normal. Yeah, normal is losing, and you're going to do a lot of it when Trump's not around. But for DeSantis, how can you make all this work? He's been very aggressive. As a matter of fact, I could make an argument more aggressive than Donald Trump when it comes to domestic policy and getting things done. But keep in mind, Ron DeSantis has the advantage of supermajorities in the Republican legislature and Republican office holders all throughout the state of Florida. It's a whole lot easier to move things as an executive. Having Trump policies and trying to work in that snake pit we otherwise call Washington, D.C. is going to be a whole lot tougher. And again, how does this square DeSantis up with the Washington establishment? This is going to be some really interesting things to take a look at the longer we go into it. But for now, DeSantis has staked out a policy position on Ukraine. And it's one of the two issues that got Trump elected: trade and war. Okay, he's put his position out there. But is it going to work? Time can only tell. As we start to wrap this up, I will ask of you the same favors that I usually do. Number one, if you are not a subscriber to this channel, please do so. We are a going little concern. We'd like to be a going big concern, and your subscription moves us closer to that goal. Number two, if you have friends of yours that you think would really enjoy this video, please feel free to share it around. I'll take all the help I can get. And number three, please hit the thumbs up button. It really helps as far as spreading the word about who we are here on the Electronic Front Porch. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative, and I'll see you next time.